The silence was the loudest thing in the room. It pressed in, heavy and thick, after the sharp, ugly sound of the plate breaking. Little shards of my favorite serving dish, a delicate floral pattern I'd picked up at an antique market years ago, were scattered like fallen confetti across the dark wood floor. The gravy, moments before a rich, savory pool, was now a spreading stain. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My daughter-in-law smashed the plate on the floor, yelled, "Bitter old woman, get out of my life," in front of all her friends. Everyone was staring. 20 pairs of eyes, just like in the original story, locked on me. Some held a flicker of pity, a few showed awkward embarrassment, but most just seemed frozen, unsure of what to do. The lively chatter that had filled Trent and Carolina's dining room just moments before had vanished, replaced by this awful, heavy quiet. It was supposed to be a celebration. Trent had finally gotten that promotion he'd been working towards, and I was so proud of him. I'd spent the afternoon beforehand carefully selecting a gift, a nice watch, something classic, and even put on my good dress, the one I usually save for special occasions. I wanted everything to be perfect. I'm Deborah, by the way. I'm 62 years old, and I've always tried my best to be a good mom to Trent. His dad, God rest his soul, passed away when Trent was still in high school, so it's always been just the two of us, really. And then Carolina came along, and I welcomed her into the family with open arms. I wanted her to feel like she belonged. I wanted us all to be happy. That night, though, it all went sideways. I had offered to help Carolina in the kitchen. She'd been rushing around, trying to get everything ready, and I thought a little extra pair of hands would be appreciated. I'd even brought my special gravy boat, the one that always gets compliments. It was a simple gesture, really. But then, the conversation drifted to the way the roast was cooked. I made a suggestion, just a little tip I'd learned from my own mother, about adding a touch of rosemary for extra flavor. It was nothing critical, nothing mean-spirited. Just a friendly suggestion. And then, Carolina just exploded. Her face went red, her eyes flashed, and she slammed the serving dish down on the table with a force that made everyone jump. The gravy splattered, the dish wobbled, and before I could even process what was happening, she'd swept her arm across the table, sending the whole thing crashing to the floor. "Enough," she'd yelled, her voice shaking. "I'm sick of you always interfering. You think you know everything, but you don't. Just get out of my life." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my cheeks burn, my throat tighten. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I'd never expected anything like that, not from Carolina. Trent just stood there, his face a mask of discomfort. He didn't say anything. He didn't defend me. He just sort of shifted his weight from one foot to the other and mumbled something about everyone needing to calm down. It was like he was trying to smooth things over, to pretend it hadn't happened, but the shattered pieces of the dish on the floor were a stark, undeniable reality. I looked at Carolina, but there was no apology in her eyes, no regret. Just anger, simmering beneath the surface. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. I felt a lump forming in my throat, a heavy weight in my chest. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned around and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make a scene. I just left. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of my neighborhood seemed strange and unfamiliar. I kept replaying the scene in my head, Carolina's harsh words echoing over and over. "Get out of my life," it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking. I parked the car, went inside, and locked the door behind me. The silence of my own house was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left, but it wasn't a comforting silence. It was a lonely one. I sank onto the couch, the events of the evening crashing down on me. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly alone. Was this what my life had come to? Was this how my own family saw me? The thought was almost too much to bear. I knew, in that moment, that things had to change. I just didn't know how. My house felt different that night. Usually, it was my sanctuary, a place filled with the quiet comfort of familiar things. But after Carolina's outburst, it felt empty. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was just a stark reminder of the noise and anger I'd walked away from. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall, seemed to whisper accusations and doubts. I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects, the framed photos on the mantelpiece, the worn armchair by the window where I loved to read. Each one held a memory, mostly of Trent. Raising him on my own after Richard passed wasn't easy, but we had our own rhythm, our own way of doing things. We were a team. Then Carolina came into his life, and things started to shift. Not all at once, but little by little. I remembered the first time I offered Carolina some advice about decorating their new place. It was just a suggestion about paint colors, something I thought would brighten up the living room. Carolina had smiled politely, but then I'd overheard her telling Trent later that I was stuck in my old ways, and that my taste was so outdated. It stung, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was a bit old-fashioned. There were other times, too. Like when I tried to offer help with Leo and Poppy when they were newborns. I'd raised a child, after all, and I thought I had some experience to share. But Carolina always seemed to have her own way of doing things, and she'd often dismiss my suggestions with a curt, "Thanks, Deborah, but we've got it covered." It felt like she was building a wall between us, brick by silent brick. And the visits started to become less frequent. The casual Sunday dinners we used to have stopped happening. Excuses were always made, the kids were tired, they had other plans, Carolina wasn't feeling well. I missed those times. I missed seeing my grandchildren, hearing their laughter, feeling their small arms wrap around my legs. Now, sitting in my quiet living room, the image of that shattered plate kept flashing in my mind. Was it just about the gravy suggestion? Or was it something more? Had I unknowingly done something to offend Carolina? Had I overstepped some invisible line? A wave of self-doubt washed over me. Maybe Nolan was right. He'd always been the outspoken one, my rock through thick and thin. He'd never been afraid to tell me the truth, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear. Just yesterday, we'd been chatting on the phone, and he'd mentioned, almost casually, that Carolina seemed a bit controlling. "She always has to be in charge, doesn't she?" he'd said. At the time, I defended Carolina, saying she was just organized. Now, his words echoed with a new, unsettling clarity. The thought of losing my connection with Trent and my grandchildren was terrifying. They were my family, my world. Had I somehow driven a wedge between us? Was I becoming that stereotypical interfering mother-in-law that everyone joked about? I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at my garden. The roses I'd planted years ago were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the grayness I felt inside. I'd always been a fixer, a nurturer. I'd raised Trent, tended my garden, created a home filled with warmth and love. How had things gotten so broken? As the night deepened, a sense of resolve began to form within me, small and fragile at first, but growing stronger with each passing moment. I couldn't let Carolina's anger and disrespect define me. I couldn't let fear dictate my next steps. Something had to change. But the how of it all still felt like a heavy, insurmountable question hanging in the air. I just knew I couldn't pretend that shattered plate and those cruel words hadn't happened. I couldn't just sweep it all under the rug. I needed to find a way to address this, not just for myself, but for my relationship with Trent and my precious grandchildren. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time since I'd walked out of their house, a tiny spark of determination flickered within me. I wouldn't let this be the end of my story. The weekend after the dinner party loomed, and I knew I couldn't just mope around the house. I needed a distraction, something to occupy my mind and keep me from dwelling on Carolina's words. That's when I remembered the attic. It was a disaster zone, a repository of forgotten memories and dusty relics. I'd been meaning to clean it out for months, maybe even years, but I'd always found an excuse to put it off. This weekend, though, I decided, was the time. The attic stairs creaked ominously as I climbed them, each step a groan of protest. The air up there was thick with the smell of old paper and mothballs. Sunlight streamed in through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust motes that danced in the beams. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, overflowing with everything from old photo albums to Trent's childhood toys. It was going to be a long day. I started with the easiest task, sorting through some old clothes. But as I dug deeper, I began to unearth more interesting things. There were letters from my parents, postcards from long ago vacations, and even a box of Trent's drawings from elementary school. Each item was a little piece of my past, a reminder of the life I'd lived. It was while I was sifting through a stack of old financial documents, tax returns, insurance policies, that I stumbled upon a thick, manila envelope tucked away in the back of a drawer. It looked official, important. My curiosity piqued. I carefully opened it. Inside were legal documents, the kind with fancy seals and complicated wording. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But as I read further, the words started to sink in. They were related to Trent and Carolina's house. And then I saw it, my name, listed as the owner. I blinked, reading it again to make sure I wasn't mistaken. It was true. I was still the legal owner of their house. A wave of shock washed over me. I had completely forgotten about this. My late husband, Richard, had bought the house years ago as an investment property. We'd always intended to sell it eventually, but then Trent and Carolina had gotten married and were looking for a place to live. So, we'd let them move in, thinking it would be a temporary arrangement. Over time, we'd just forgotten about the ownership. I sat back on my heels, the documents clutched in my hands. The implications of this discovery slowly began to dawn on me. I owned their house. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, a mix of confusion and a flicker of something else, something almost like power. Just as I was trying to process this, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable, my neighbor from across the street. She was a sweet woman, always friendly, but sometimes a bit nosy. "Deborah, dear," she said, her voice hesitant. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but my heart sank. What was coming? "Well, I've seen Carolina a few times lately," she continued, with another man. The words hit me like a splash of cold water. Another man? Carolina? Mrs. Gable went on to describe the man, his car, the places she'd seen them together. It was all vague, circumstantial, but the implication was clear: Carolina might be having an affair. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Disbelief, anger, and a deep sense of sadness swirled within me. For Trent, for my grandchildren. This was almost too much to take in. I thanked Mrs. Gable for telling me, my voice trembling slightly, and hung up the phone. I sat there in the dusty attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, grappling with the weight of these two revelations. I owned their house. And Carolina might be betraying Trent. The power dynamic had shifted, dramatically and unexpectedly. I now held information that could change everything. But what was I going to do with it? How could I possibly navigate this treacherous new territory? The questions swirled in my mind, heavy and unanswered. All I knew for sure was that my life, which had felt so stable just a few days ago, was now teetering on the edge of something uncertain, something potentially explosive. Mrs. Gable's words hung heavy in the air, mingling with the dust motes in the attic. I didn't want to believe her. My son Trent loved Carolina, and they had two beautiful children together, Leo and Poppy. The thought of Carolina being unfaithful was upsetting, not just for Trent, but for the whole family. It would break all our hearts. But Mrs. Gable wasn't one to gossip without reason. She was a kind woman, and her hesitation on the phone had sounded genuine. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to take root, growing into a gnawing unease. I knew I couldn't just ignore it. If it were true, Trent deserved to know. But how could I tell him? And what if it wasn't true? I'd cause unnecessary pain and suspicion. I needed to be sure. So, I decided to do some discreet observing. It wasn't something I was proud of. Snooping around felt wrong, like I was crossing a line. But I felt a responsibility, a need to know the truth before I said anything to Trent. Over the next few days, I found reasons to be in Trent and Carolina's neighborhood. I'd drive by their street on my way to the grocery store or the library. I even took a few longer walks than usual, just hoping to catch a glimpse of something. It felt awkward and a little bit silly, an old woman trying to play detective. But the worry in my heart pushed me on. Then, one afternoon, as I was, coincidentally, driving past their street, I saw them. Carolina and a man I didn't recognize were getting out of a car a few houses down. They were laughing, and there was a familiarity in their gestures, the way he touched her arm, the way she looked at him. It wasn't just a casual acquaintance. I pulled over a block away, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I watched as they walked towards the house, still talking and laughing. I felt a cold dread wash over me. Mrs. Gable's words, which I had tried to dismiss, now seemed horribly real. Over the next week, I saw them together a couple more times. Once, they were having coffee at a small outdoor cafe. Another time, I saw his car parked outside their house late at night when Trent's car wasn't there. Each sighting chipped away at my hope that it was all a misunderstanding. The emotional toll of keeping this secret was heavy. I felt torn. I loved Trent, and the thought of him being hurt like this was unbearable. But I also didn't want to be the one to deliver the bad news, to shatter his world. I needed advice. So, I called Nolan. He's always been my confidant, the person I can always count on for honest, straightforward advice. I met him for coffee at our usual spot. I laid it all out for him, Carolina's behavior at the dinner, my discovery of the house deed, and now Mrs. Gable's observations and what I had seen myself. Nolan listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. When I finished, he took a sip of his coffee and sighed. "Deborah," he said gently, "this is a tough one. You're in a difficult position." He didn't tell me what to do, but he asked me a lot of questions, helping me to think through the different possibilities and potential outcomes. He reminded me that Trent deserved to know the truth, but he also cautioned me to be sure of my facts. "You have to consider what you want to achieve here, Deborah," Nolan said. "Do you want to expose Carolina? Do you want to protect Trent? Do you want to try and salvage the family?" His questions helped me to clarify my own thoughts. My priority was Trent. He deserved to know the truth, whatever it might be. And my grandchildren deserved a stable and loving home. As I talked to Nolan, a plan began to form in my mind. I realized that confronting Carolina directly might be the best first step. I needed to lay out what I knew, calmly and clearly, and see how she responded. The house deed gave me a certain amount of leverage, but I didn't want to use it as a weapon. I wanted to appeal to whatever sense of decency she might still have. By the time I left the coffee shop, I had made up my mind. I was going to write a letter to Carolina. It wouldn't be accusatory or emotional. It would simply state what I knew, about the house and about what I had seen. I would give her a chance to explain, to do the right thing. Writing that letter was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I wanted to be firm but not cruel, honest but not inflammatory. I chose my words carefully, each sentence weighed with the potential to either heal or further wound. When it was finally finished, sealed in an envelope, it felt heavy in my hands, carrying the weight of secrets and the fragile hope for some kind of resolution. Sitting at my kitchen table, the blank page in front of me felt daunting. I wanted to get this letter just right. It couldn't sound angry or judgmental, because that would just make Carolina defensive. I needed to be clear and firm, stating the facts without letting my emotions take over. I started by writing about the house. I explained that Richard had bought it as an investment years ago, and that I was still the legal owner. I kept the tone neutral, almost businesslike. There was no need for accusations or blame in this part. It was simply a statement of fact. Then came the harder part, addressing what I had seen. I wrote about Mrs. Gable's concerns and then about my own observations. I didn't go into detail about the laughter or the way they touched. I just stated that I had seen Carolina with another man on multiple occasions, and that it seemed to be more than just a casual friendship. As I wrote, I kept thinking about Trent and the kids. I didn't want to cause unnecessary drama or hurt them more than they might already be. But I also knew that pretending everything was fine wasn't the answer. I reread the letter several times, tweaking the wording, making sure it conveyed my message without sounding overly emotional or accusatory. I wanted Carolina to understand that I knew what was going on, but also that I was trying to approach this calmly. Once I was satisfied, I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope. I decided to deliver it myself. I wanted to speak to Carolina face to face, but I also wanted to do it when Trent wasn't there. A confrontation in front of him would just put him in an impossible position. I drove over to their house mid-morning on a Tuesday. Trent's car wasn't in the driveway, so I knew he was at work. I took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. Carolina answered, a look of surprise on her face when she saw me. "Deborah? What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone wary. "I need to talk to you, Carolina," I said, my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let me in. The atmosphere in the house felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. Leo and Poppy weren't around, which I was grateful for. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. I handed her the envelope. "I wrote you a letter," I said simply. Carolina took it, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She opened it and began to read. As she did, her expression shifted. First, there was disbelief, then a flicker of anger, and finally, a look of something akin to panic. When she finished reading, she looked up at me, her face pale. This isn't true," she stammered, her voice shaking slightly. "You're mistaken. Carolina," I said calmly, "I've seen you. And Mrs. Gable has too. I know what's going on." Her denial wavered. I could see the realization dawning in her eyes that I wasn't just making accusations. I had information. I had proof. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. Just a few weeks ago, she had been the one yelling at me, dismissing me. Now, I was the one holding the cards, not in a vindictive way, but in a way that demanded she acknowledge the truth. "And there's also the matter of the house," I continued, my voice firm but not unkind. "As you know, I'm still the legal owner." Carolina's eyes widened. She hadn't known that. I laid out my terms, clearly and without anger. "Carolina, I want this to stop. The affair, the disrespect, it all has to stop. Trent is my son, and Leo and Poppy are my grandchildren. I won't stand by and watch them get hurt." I paused, letting my words sink in. "You have a choice to make. You can end this, work on your marriage, and treat me with the respect I deserve as Trent's mother and the children's grandmother. Or, I let the implication hang in the air." I didn't need to spell out the consequences. She understood. I stood up to leave. "Think about what I've said, Carolina," I said, my gaze steady. The choice is yours. As I walked out of their house, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and a newfound sense of self-respect. I had finally spoken my truth. I had stood up for myself and for my family. The outcome was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken back some control. The weight of the secret was still there, but it felt a little bit lighter now that it was out in the open. The days that followed my conversation with Carolina were filled with a tense, unsettling quiet. My phone seemed to ring every few hours. First, it would be Carolina, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. She'd accuse me of interfering, of trying to break up her marriage. She'd deny everything, her protests becoming more frantic with each call. Then, Trent would call. His voice was different, confused, worried, and a little bit accusing. "Mom, what's going on?" he'd ask. "Carolina's really upset. She says you came over and said some crazy things." He sounded like he didn't know what to believe, caught between his wife and his mother. It broke my heart to hear the uncertainty in his voice. I knew I had to talk to Trent, face to face. Phone calls weren't cutting it. So, I asked him to come over one evening after work. He arrived looking tired and stressed, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mom," he began as soon as he walked in, "Carolina's saying you accused her of having an affair? And something about the house." I took a deep breath. "Trent, we need to talk honestly," I said, leading him to sit down on the sofa. I started with the house. I explained the original arrangement with his dad, how we'd bought it as an investment and had always intended for it to be temporary for him and Carolina. I showed him the documents, the legal proof that I was still the owner. He looked surprised, a little taken aback. I didn't know that," he admitted. Then came the difficult part. I told him about Mrs. Gable's observations and about what I had seen myself. I didn't go into graphic details, but I laid out the facts as calmly and clearly as I could. Trent listened in stunned silence, his face pale. As I spoke, I saw a range of emotions flicker across his features: disbelief, confusion, and then a dawning horror. When I finished, he just sat there for a long moment, staring blankly ahead. I don't understand," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "Carolina? With someone else? That's not possible." I reached out and took his hand. "Trent, I wish it weren't true. Believe me, I do. But I've seen them. More than once." The denial in his eyes slowly began to fade, replaced by a look of pain and betrayal. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. Why? Why would she do that? I didn't have an answer for him. I could only offer him comfort and support. I told him that I hadn't wanted to be the one to tell him this, but I felt he deserved to know the truth. As we talked, I could see a shift happening within him. The initial defensiveness towards Carolina was starting to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of hurt and anger. He started asking questions, wanting to know more about what I had seen. By the end of the evening, the confusion in his eyes had been replaced by a grim determination. "I need to talk to her, Mom," he said, his voice firm. "I need to know the truth." I nodded, my heart heavy. I knew this conversation would be difficult, painful even. But it was necessary. Trent deserved to know the truth, and he deserved to make his own decisions about his marriage. He stood up to leave, his shoulders slumped with the weight of what he had just learned. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly as he reached the door. "For telling me." "I love you, Trent," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you." He gave me a sad nod and walked out into the night. I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the street, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I had done what I felt was right, but now all I could do was wait and hope for the best. The confrontation between Trent and Carolina would be the next chapter, and I had no idea what the outcome would be. The next few days were a blur of tense phone calls and worried thoughts. I didn't know what was happening between Trent and Carolina, but the silence from their house was deafening. Then, one evening, my doorbell rang. It was Trent, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his face was etched with a deep sadness. Leo and Poppy were with him, their small faces mirroring their father's distress. "Mom," Trent said, his voice thick with emotion, can we stay here for a while?" I didn't hesitate. "Of course, honey. Come in." As they came inside, the weight of the situation settled heavily in my living room. The kids looked confused and a little scared, clinging to their dad's legs. I knelt down and hugged them tight. "Grandma's got you," I whispered, trying to offer them some comfort. Later, after the kids were tucked into the spare bedrooms, Trent finally told me what had happened. He had confronted Carolina, just like he said he would. He had asked her directly about the other man, about everything I had told him. At first, Carolina had denied it vehemently. She'd accused me of lying, of trying to cause trouble. She'd even tried to turn it around on Trent, asking if he didn't trust her. It was the same defensive wall she had put up with me, only this time, Trent wasn't buying it. He told her about what I had seen, about Mrs. Gable's observations. He told her that he trusted his own mother, that he knew I wouldn't make something like this up. When her denial started to crumble, she tried to shift the blame. She said she was lonely, that Trent was always working, that I was always interfering. It was a flurry of excuses, none of them really landing. But Trent pressed her. He asked her directly if she was having an affair, and finally, the truth came out. It wasn't a tearful confession, he said, but a cold, almost resentful admission. She admitted there was someone else. The revelation hit Trent hard. He had loved Carolina, had built a life with her. The betrayal cut deep. He told me about the arguments, the tears, the raw anger he felt. He also talked about Leo and Poppy, and the confusion and sadness he saw in their eyes. It was clear that their marriage was unraveling. The trust had been broken, and the foundation they had built their family on was crumbling. Trent had made a difficult decision. He knew he couldn't stay in a relationship built on lies and infidelity. He needed to protect himself, but more importantly, he needed to protect his children from the emotional turmoil. So, he had told Carolina that he was leaving. He had packed a bag for himself and the kids, and they had come to my house. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't stay there any longer. As he spoke, I listened, my heart aching for him and for my grandchildren. This wasn't how I had wanted things to turn out. I had hoped Carolina would choose to fix things, to save her marriage. But her choices had led them here, to my doorstep, seeking refuge. That night, my small house felt full in a different way. It wasn't just filled with furniture and memories, it was filled with a broken family seeking comfort and safety. I held Trent close, and we sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their unraveling life hanging heavy in the air. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I also knew that we would face it together. My son and my grandchildren were here, and that's all that mattered. My focus now was on providing them with a safe and loving space to begin to heal. The first few weeks of having Trent and the kids living with me were different. My quiet, orderly house was suddenly filled with the happy chaos of children again. Toys scattered the living room, cartoons played on the TV, and there was always someone asking for a snack. It was a big adjustment for all of us, but it was a welcome kind of noise. Trent was understandably heartbroken and preoccupied. He spent a lot of time just being there for Leo and Poppy, trying to reassure them and maintain some sense of normalcy in their lives. He handled their questions about their mom with patience and love, explaining that sometimes grown-ups need some time apart. My role shifted. I became a safe harbor, a constant source of comfort and stability. I cooked their favorite meals, helped with homework, and read bedtime stories. I tried to create a routine for the kids, something familiar they could rely on in the midst of all the change. It wasn't always easy. There were days filled with tears and sadness, especially from the children who missed their mom. Trent had his own moments of quiet despair. But we leaned on each other. We talked, we hugged, and we found small moments of joy in the everyday things, a funny movie, a walk in the park, a shared game of checkers. Slowly, a new rhythm began to emerge in our little household. Trent started to help more around the house, cooking meals and doing laundry. He spent more time playing with Leo and Poppy, rediscovering the simple joys of being a dad without the shadow of his troubled marriage hanging over him. I saw a change in Trent. He seemed more present, more engaged with his children. The weight he had been carrying seemed to lift a little each day. He started talking about the future, tentative plans for finding a new place for him and the kids. Carolina, in the meantime, was mostly absent. There were a few strained phone calls with Trent, mostly about the children. I heard snippets of their conversations, apologies mixed with defensiveness, attempts to explain that never quite landed. It seemed she was starting to realize the gravity of her actions and the consequences they had brought. Whether it was true reflection or just regret at the situation she found herself in, I couldn't say. Legally, things were moving slowly. Trent started talking to a lawyer about separation and custody arrangements. It was a difficult and painful process, but a necessary one. The focus was always on what was best for Leo and Poppy, ensuring they had a stable and loving environment. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in my house began to lighten. The sadness was still there, a quiet undercurrent, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. We were learning to navigate our new reality, finding strength in each other. Leo and Poppy started to adjust. They still missed their mom, but they were also thriving in the consistent love and attention they were receiving from Trent and me. Their laughter echoed through the house more often now, a sweet melody of resilience. One evening, as we were all sitting down for dinner, a simple meal I had cooked, I looked around the table. Trent was smiling as he helped Poppy cut her chicken. Leo was excitedly telling a story about his day at school. A sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for them, but there was a sense of healing in this new beginning. We were piecing ourselves back together, stronger for having weathered the storm. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it held a glimmer of hope. With Trent and the kids settled in, the question of the house lingered. It was still legally mine, a fact that felt both strange and significant. I thought long and hard about what to do. Part of me considered selling it, using the money to help Trent get a fresh start, a place that was truly his own. But another part of me felt a connection to that house, the place where Trent and Carolina had built their family, where Leo and Poppy had spent their early years. After many sleepless nights, I made a decision. I called Trent and told him I wanted to transfer the ownership of the house to him. He was surprised, his voice full of emotion. "Mom, you don't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I do, honey," I replied. "It was always meant to be a place for your family. Now, it's time for it to truly be yours. A new beginning for you and the children." He was incredibly grateful, and the relief in his voice was palpable. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to help him move forward without the lingering shadow of the past ownership. In the weeks that followed, Carolina made a few attempts to reach out. She called me a couple of times, her voice softer now, more subdued than before. She apologized for her behavior, for the hurtful things she had said. It wasn't a quick fix, and the pain she had caused wouldn't disappear overnight, but it felt like a small step in the right direction. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. I wasn't sure if I was ready to fully forgive Carolina, not yet. The hurt was still too raw. But I knew, for Trent's sake and for the children, that we needed to find a way to coexist peacefully. I decided that setting clear boundaries was important. I told Carolina that I was willing to have a civil relationship for the sake of Leo and Poppy, but that it would take time for trust to be rebuilt. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized how much I had grown. That night at the dinner party, when Carolina had thrown the plate and yelled those cruel words, I had felt small and defeated. But something had shifted within me. Discovering the truth about the house, and then about Carolina's betrayal, had awakened a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had found my voice, and I had stood up for myself and for my family. The journey hadn't been easy, filled with pain and uncertainty. But I had learned the importance of self-respect and the courage it takes to face difficult truths. I had also rediscovered the deep bond once shared with Trent and the unconditional love I had for my grandchildren. Life wasn't perfect. Healing would continue for all of us. Trent would eventually find his own place with Leo and Poppy, creating a new home filled with love and laughter. Carolina would have her own path to navigate, hopefully one of self-reflection and growth. And I would continue to be there for my son and my grandchildren, a constant source of love and support. The shattered plate that night had been a symbol of brokenness, but from those broken pieces, something new and stronger had emerged. Our family, our real family, had found a way to piece itself back together, not exactly as it was before, but perhaps even more resilient. Now, as I share my story with you, I want to ask, have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult family situation? What do you think is more important, forgiveness or setting boundaries? How do you find strength when you feel betrayed by someone you love? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories and insights are valuable. If you found my story to be thought-provoking or helpful, please give this video a like. It helps others find stories like mine. Share it with your friends and family, you never know who might need to hear this. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, love, and finding strength in unexpected places, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for listening.